name is Kathy, and I am the moderator for today's session. And the Master Gardener panel members joining me are John, Ellen, and Nancy, and our Zoom co-host is Hillary. Our program is divided into 3 parts. First is our main lawn care topic, which is fall weed strategies. Next are the details of 2 different weeds you're likely to encounter in your yard soon, if not now. They are curly dock and common mallow. And finally, we'll answer your lawn questions, taking those we received during registration first, then any we have in today's chat box. Okay, so panel members, are you ready to begin? Our first presentation by John on fall weed control strategies should be very interesting. So John, my question would be, is there any difference in treating fall weeds since winter temperatures will be killing those weeds and treating spring weeds once they emerge?
Well, that's a great question, Kathy. And yes, there is a big difference between which weeds are treated in the fall and which are treated in the spring. I'm going to be covering that a bit in my presentation. So welcome everyone. As Kathy said, my name is John, and it's my pleasure to present to you some of the fall weed control strategies for your Northern Virginia lawn. If you've participated in any other Master Gardener presentations, you'll know that we often emphasize that turf grass is actually a non-native plant species that is expensive, contributes little to native flora and fauna, and consumes a vast amount of water, gasoline for mowing, chemicals when it's fertilized, and so on. Some people even refer to it as being invasive. While I would encourage any homeowner to take a look at their garden and look at their lawn and look at ways in which they can convert some of that lawn into more native uses, the fact of the matter is that most of us are unwilling to get rid of our entire lawn. So let's see what we can do to help make your lawn a little healthier and happier. The first thing you need to do in the fall when identifying your fall weed control strategies is to understand whether you have a cool season grass or a warm season grass, as the weed control strategies are different. While it's a little bit more complicated than this, as kind of a general rule, cool season grasses are those that stay green all season long, all winter long, all year long, while warm season ones are the ones that go dormant and turn brown during the cold months. The vast majority of lawns in Northern Virginia are comprised of a grass called tall fescue, which is a cool season grass, sometimes with a small amount of ryegrass or perennial Kentucky bluegrass mixed in. I'm going to be focusing my presentation entirely on the cool season grasses, but please note that the various resources I will be citing that can be found at the end of this presentation have information on weed control strategies for more warm season grasses as well, such as zoysia grass, which some people do have in the area. So to start with, a lot of people will ask me, why weed control in the fall, as Kathy did? Isn't the time to do this in the spring? Well, in Virginia, many of our most problematic weeds are cool season broadleaf perennials. And fall is a time when those are actively growing and translocating food and water throughout the plant. In order to control them with an herbicide, it is very important to get that chemical translocated throughout the entire plant in order to affect points beneath the ground as well as points above. So for cool season broadleaf weeds like dandelions, plantains, ground ivy, also called creeping Charlie, etc., applying an herbicide in the fall allows the active ingredient in that herbicide to be spread throughout the weed and get its way down into the roots where it can do the most damage. On the contrary, in the spring, all of the plant's energy is focused on growing up, and an herbicide that is applied to these weeds never really makes its way to the root. It'll burn the leaves on the top, but it doesn't get down. It won't have nearly as much impact as if it was applied in the fall when the plant is translocating food and water throughout its body. Another reason to address weed control in the fall is that If you are using broadleaf herbicides, there's always a chance that some of it will unintentionally make its way onto your desirable plants, such as the butterfly weed I have in the picture here on this slide. In the fall, the tolerance levels of those kinds of perennials, as well as trees, shrubs, the kinds of flowers that you want to have in your garden, their tolerance level to exposure to a broadleaf herbicide is much, much higher because they've been hardened off by the stresses of the summer. These plants have gone through all sorts of weather changes. They've gone through periods of drought. They've gone through heavy rain, and they've just gotten, to be frank, just kind of gotten tough. Many of you who start plants in the spring will also know about the hardening off period that you go through before you move plants from inside to outside. This is what your plants are doing, and it makes them a lot more resilient if they're inadvertently sprayed or get some residue from an herbicide. By contrast, those same plants in the spring are much weaker when they're emerging from their winter dormancy, or if they're new seedlings coming from seeds, and they're much more susceptible to being unintended herbicide damage. A third reason that we want to address lawn weeds in the fall is that it's also an ideal time to control the majority of winter annual broadleaf weeds, as well as annual bluegrass that emerge in September through mid-October. These are both very big deals in Northern Virginia. Let me tell you a little bit why they're so important. A lot of times we think about annuals when you go down to the local garden nursery to buy an annual. We think of it as a plant that's grown for one season and it dies when the frost comes. But in fact, there are other kinds of annuals, in this case winter annuals, that germinate in the autumn and winter, live throughout the winter, bloom in the late winter or the spring, and then they die before or as the heat of the summer comes. So they're almost on the opposite schedule as annuals that you might have in your garden, the flowers you might have. They're not going to be killed by the frost. They end up getting killed by the heat of the summer. And those things are just starting to germinate in the fall. So weeds like henbit, dead nettle, chickweeds, Carolina geranium, buttercups, they're all prominent winter annual broadleaf weeds, and they can be much more easily controlled by an herbicide when they are young and actively growing, or they have not yet they've not yet germinated. A lot of these are very hard to pull in the spring due to the nature of how they grow. So addressing them in the fall before they've germinated is the most effective way of dealing with them and can make your weeding in the spring much, much easier. Now, a quick note about chemical controls. You may have already noticed that in my first few slides here, I've already talked exclusively about using chemicals such as herbicides. And you're probably asking yourself, well, what kind of a master gardener is this guy? I thought we were supposed to be promoting chemicals as a last resort. So please make no mistake, chemical controls should always be as a last resort. Cultural controls, such as hand removing weeds, growing thicker lawns that squeeze out weeds, those are always better to do, and those methods should be utilized first. However, if you're unable to employ cultural controls, or you've done so in the past without some success, then chemical controls may be your next best option. And this is why fall provides such a unique time to use some of them, because fall is a time when these can be very, very effective. So let's turn a little bit of the discussion over to the kinds of weeds that need to be addressed in the fall. As mentioned, the first group are the broadleaf perennial weeds, such as dandelions, plantains, wild violets, etc. You may have pulled hundreds of these this past summer and are frustrated that they keep coming back. As we've stated, these are perennials and they come back year after year. So it's not just blaming your neighbor's dandelion seeds blowing into your yard that's causing all this havoc. If you're not pulling out 100% of the root, they will keep growing back. So how can we address this in the fall? There are a wide variety of post-emergent herbicides that are available, including any of the following. And this is just a small list. There's what they call 2,4-D, which has that very long name that I have difficulty saying consistently. There's dicamba, there's mecoprop, there's ticlopor, or ticlopur. Those are just 4 of them, but those are the 4 of the most common ones. Many of products sold at garden centers contain a mixture of these herbicides, and they mix them together so that it will cover a wider range of broadleaf perennials. If you know what specific weeds you're targeting, you can always easily look at the label on the herbicide and see if your weeds are covered. I'd also like to make a quick point about the herbicide packaging and labeling. You're not just, quote unquote, encouraged to read and follow these directions carefully. Please understand that it's the law that you must follow the instructions on the label carefully. It is a violation of federal law to use an herbicide in a manner that's inconsistent with its label. So don't go trying to, kill those frustrating dandelions by using 4 times more herbicide than you need, hoping it will absolutely kill it. You can do a lot of damage to things that you don't want to kill doing that. So please read the label carefully and use any herbicide that you use as instructed. The next group of weeds we want to address in the fall are the annual bluegrass and the winter annual broadleaf weeds, such as henbit, chickweed, buttercups, etc. In this case, we're going to be looking at a pre-emergent herbicide, one that's going to prevent them from germinating in the first place. And there's a few different ones that are available. The chemical names are benzoylide, dithiopyr, prodiamine. And again, those are just a few of them. There's many of them available. It's similar to the post-emergent herbicides. The pre-emergent ones, very often sold at garden centers, contain a mixture of them, different concentrations, different percentages, in order to cover a wider range of weeds. So with these, just as with the post-emergent ones, you're going to want to make sure you read the directions carefully and use them as instructed. Now, if you know exactly the weed or weeds that you would like to target, the pest management guide for turf found on the Virginia Tech Extension website is an incredible guide to help you get the most effective herbicide for your weed. As a whole, the pest management guide resource is an invaluable tool for addressing pests in your home, garden, be it weed, insect, disease, whatever the pest is for anywhere on your lawn and in your vegetable garden, your flower garden, etc. In this particular example, and I certainly don't expect you to be able to read this, this slide that I've cut out, but the pest management guide for turf has 2 full pages of broadleaf weeds that are found in Northern Virginia, or I should just say it's found in Virginia, in cool season grasses, and how they respond to any of 9 different common broadleaf herbicides. And that's what's listed across the top here. And on the left are all the different weeds. And it's only a half page, but there's 2 full pages of them. And it'll tell you how effective that herbicide will be against that specific weed and the time to apply and treat those weeds. So it's a very, very useful tool and can make sure that choosing an effective herbicide, it can help you choose the most effective herbicide for your most concerning weeds. Another great tool is the Virginia Cooperative Extension's maintenance calendar for cool season turf grasses. I also don't expect you to read this. I know the print's very, very small, but it is a great resource for the proper timing of both pre and post-emergent herbicides for your lawn, and as well as other turf health activities such as overseeding, aeration, dethatching, fertilizing, etc. Now, speaking of overseeding, I would like to also add a quick caveat. You're going to need to be very, very careful when applying herbicides to newly seeded or overseeded areas, as the pre-emergent herbicides, the ones that prevent weeds from germinating, will severely impact the germination of new grass seed. Overseeding is a great way to make your lawn thicker, and it's the perfect time to do it is in the fall. In fact, as I have learned the hard way, overseeding in the spring, regardless of how nice it looks, will usually end up being dead grass by the time you get to the heat of the summer. So the fall is really the only time to do overseeding. And if you must do overseeding, and different lawns require it at different levels, some people do it every year, some people do it every other year. But if you do need to overseed, do this first. A rule of thumb is that you do not apply any herbicides to your lawn if you've overseeded until you have needed to mow the new grass at least 2 times. By then, the new grass will be strong enough to endure the effects of the pre-emergent herbicide. So do the overseeding first, wait until you've needed to mow it twice, then you can apply your pre-emergent herbicides to your lawn. So one thing at the beginning of the presentation, Kathy had asked me a question, is there any difference in treating these fall weeds since winter temperatures will be killing them and treating spring weeds once they emerge? And I had said at the time that there is a big difference between which weeds are treated in the fall and which are treated in the spring. One of the most important weeds to attack in the spring are the annual weedy grasses, such as the dreaded crabgrass. Any crabgrass that you have is about to die in the next month or so. So spraying that now is likely a waste of time or money. If you find it ugly, you can pull it out, no problem. But it doesn't make any sense right now to spray it because it's going to die anyways, and it's an annual. For those kinds of weeds, the best way to control them is to apply a pre-emergent herbicide in the spring if cultural controls such as pulling have not worked for you. Now, one final note before I wrap up. Always keep in mind that the best way to control weeds in your turf is to have a healthy turf. It's like the human body. The healthier it is, the better it's able to fight off pests and disease. So don't forget to do the things that will help make your overall health of your lawn strong. One is to properly fertilize your lawn based on a soil test and carefully following the instructions on the fertilizer label. Soil test is an absolutely invaluable tool, and they're very inexpensive. It's the best $10 you'll ever spend. There, you can find out information on them at the Virginia Cooperative Extension website. You send it into Virginia Tech. It will do a thorough analysis of your soil that you mail them, and it will tell you exactly the kinds of nutrients that it needs to be healthy. So that's to fertilize based on a soil test and not on a television commercial. The next is to core aerate and to thatch your yard, and then to overseed when it's needed. Doing these things will all help keep your lawn in great shape and help keep the weeds at bay before you need to worry about pulling them or using herbicides. So as mentioned here's a list of the references that I used for this presentation, and which I believe you will find useful as well. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their time and hand things back to Kathy.
Thank you very much, John. I loved your graphics, your presentation, and we do want to emphasize that VCE and Virginia Tech websites for comprehensive information for lawns in the fall that John noted here in his resources. And next, Ellen will be talking about the weed called curly dock. And Ellen, I've heard that curly dock seeds can stay viable in the ground for several years. So I'd like to know what can be done to rid my lawn of that weed if possible. And Ellen would need to unmute.
Thanks, Kathy.
Okay.
And yes, in answer to your question, I will be talking about how curly dock seeds will linger in the soil for many, many years to come, haunting us. The broadleaf weed curly dock, or the Latin for that is Rumex crispus, is in the smartweed family. It's a herbaceous perennial that's considered a weed in the United States as well as 40 other countries. However, it's native to Europe. Seeds from curly dock germinate at various times through the growing season, depending on light and fluctuating temperatures, but typically plants emerge in the spring. Initially, curly dock consists of a rosette of dull, dark green basal leaves about 1 foot across. The leaves are oblong shaped and lanceolate, and the margins, like are shown in the picture here, are wavy or curly and resemble crisp bacon, although I don't think I'd want to eat any of it. In late spring, a flowering stalk, like the one in the left picture, bolts from the rosette. It's round in circumference, hairless and ribbed. The flowers consist of 6 to 18-inch panicles of racemes with whorls of flowers. The yellowish and reddish-green flowers typically appear April through July and then continue through late fall, turning reddish-brown at maturity. Each flower matures into a dry, heart-shaped winged achene that contains a single seed. The picture on the left here shows those seeds, and when they're first emerging. But as they mature during the fall, they'll start turning a brown color, dark brown. These seeds are primarily distributed by wind or by water. Since the flowers are cross-pollinated by the wind, they attract very few insect pollinators. The different parts of the plant are eaten by various insects. And this plant is also a host plant of the American copper butterfly, which I believe may find its way through Virginia sometimes. I think it's a little orange butterfly, so I'd love to be able to know if anybody has seen it or knows if it's in Virginia. The seeds are also eaten by many upland birds, including the song sparrow, the red-winged blackbird, as well as the white-footed mouse. Curly dock thrives in full sun. It prefers disturbed sites with nutrient-rich, heavy, damp soils. With that said, it seems to easily adapt to temporary flooding or dry areas with poor soils. Typical habitats include vacant lots, roadside banks, pastures, weedy meadows, and edges of yards and gardens, probably like some of this showing up in my yard. A single plant can produce up to 60,000 seeds that can germinate readily or stay viable in the soil. And now this is for you, Kathy, will stay viable in the soil for up to 80 years.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. Plants can be controlled with mowing to prevent seed production and reduce top growth. Curly dock grows thick tap roots with a pale yellow interior. And these roots, if you can believe it, will extend 4 feet deep with side branches up to 3 feet long. Sounds more like an oak tree if you ask me.
Yeah.
Uprooting, chopping, and burying the tap roots will provide control as well as removing the crown with a shovel about 2 inches below the soil surface. For post-emergence chemical control, the Virginia Cooperative Extension Pest Management Guide, which John referred to, recommends using a product in the spring with the active ingredient 2,4-D in combination with any of the following: dicamba, MCPP, triclopyr, or penoxylam. And as he has mentioned, and as we will continue to stress, it's important that you always follow the label instructions because that's the law. And finally, I have a list of references that I've used to find the information for this topic and also for the photos that I've accessed. Thanks.
Thank you, Ellen. I didn't know it was native to Europe, and it was so difficult to eradicate. I can't believe those seeds last 80 years. I do note here that you have the pest management guide also in your resources. So it was a very nice presentation. And our final presenter will be Nancy, who will inform us about the weed called common mallow. I've heard that this is a very tough weed as it can survive frigid temperatures, dry soil, and mowing. And I'm anxious to hear your recommendations on removing it from a lawn, Nancy.
Okay, we can go through that.
That sounds good.
Okay, the common mallow has many other names, including buttonweed and cheeseweed. It is a Eurasian species growing anywhere the soil has been disturbed. It belongs to the family Malvaceae, which includes cotton, hibiscus, okra, and Althea officinalis, the original ingredient of marshmallows. Found throughout the United States, it is a host of the painted lady butterfly, so it does have some redeeming qualities. The mallow life cycle can be confusing. It's an invasive broadleaf weed that spreads easily. It can be an annual or a biennial. It grows year-round, making it a perennial, but its primary growth season is April through November. It also is a weed whose leaves and seeds are edible. A mallow's flowers can be pink, lavender, or white. Each bloom has 4 to 5 petals or rays. These petals are notched at the tip, so a blossom may appear to have 10 petals. These showy flowers appear in the summer. Mallows reproduce by seeds, which have very thick coats. The coat may slow germination, but it also allows seeds to survive for years in the soil. If the coat is damaged and allows moisture to enter, the plant germinates. Fragmented stems do occasionally root at nodes if moisture is present for a long enough period. The fruit is a round, flattened pod, you can see it there in the center, that looks like a wheel of cheese or a pumpkin, hence the alternate common names. There are 10 to 12 sections per pod. Each section contains one reddish-brown to black round seed, which is edible. Leaves are ovate or egg-shaped. They are shallowly lobed and have toothed edges arranged alternately around the stem. Mallow's leaves are about 1.5 inches across and hairy on both sides. Their crinkly appearance is distinctive. When a mallow first appears, it throws 2 smooth, heart-shaped leaves. They are folded in bud to form an inverted cone. Then, as more leaves appear, the plant forms a basal rosette. This is when you want to pull it. Its petioles are long and hairy. There are prominent veins radiating from the center of each leaf. The stems can be from 4 to 34 inches long, and they trail on the ground. Mallows have a woody taproot that is accompanied by coarse secondary roots of various lengths. Disturbed soil is its favorite habitat, and as Kathleen said, very little discourages its growth. Not frigid temperatures nor drought, not soil compaction, or even low mowing. It does have a twin, however. Ground ivy, or creeping Charlie, has a very similar appearance. Ground ivy spreads by stolons in moist, fertilized shady areas that are kept mowed. It has coin-shaped scalloped edges and a strong mint odor. It has purple flowers in mid-May. A member of the mint family, it has a square stem. Compare this picture to the one of common mallow on the right. Is it on the right or on the left? On the left, actually. And note the differences are clear. Not that you want to have either of them. Common mallow can be controlled with hand weeding, hoeing, and clean cultivation. Plants must be removed before flowering to keep seeds out of the soil. Solarization and flaming are not effective. Plants with fruit should be removed and trashed or burned. There are no known biological controls. The preferred time to treat mallow is in the spring or summer when it is growing most actively, as John mentioned. For effective herbicides, please consult the 2021 Pest Management Guide. Check Table 5-9. It is published by the Virginia Cooperative Extension Agent. Always follow label instructions on any pesticide product. It's the law. The most important thing to remember is to pull this plant before there are more than 4 leaves. If you would like to learn more, here are some sources.
Thank you very much, Nancy, for your presentation. I'm glad it's so easy to recognize, and I really liked your comparison to ground ivy, so someone can differentiate between the two. And moving on, we do have a question from Angelia, who is frustrated by an invasion of weeds in her lawn, and she submitted some excellent photographs illustrating the severity of her problem, as you see on the screen. Our master gardener, Tony, will address her weed problem now. After Tony's slides, we will answer any chat box questions, or they will be answered via email by one of today's panel members. So welcome to Tony.
Well, hi. we all share this frustration to varying degrees. What can we do to kill off all of our weeds? And maybe that's the wrong thing we need to be thinking about. But anyway, there's responsible ways of addressing this. And so believe it or not, healthy lawn growth is in fact by far the best weed preventative measure available for our lawns. You've heard all of our presenters cite the Virginia Tech Pest Management Guide. And in the chapter on weeds, it opens by saying that most lawn weed problems in Virginia can be blamed on one thing, and that's cutting the grass too short. And we'll explain this further in a minute. But if we do have weeds, the best and safest way to get rid of them is, of course, by hand pulling. And if there are a lot, this could entail some work. And for certain weeds, this could be a harder job than for other weeds. So, but having said all that, if extra help is needed, then we can resort to certain chemical products. And as we've heard, there are two kinds of products that are available, the pre-emergence. These keep you from germinating. And there are post-emergence, which actually then will kill the weeds that are growing. So which ones do we use? Well, it's going to depend on the weed, and it's going to depend on the time of year, as we've learned from John's slides in his presentation. And further, the post-emergent products can be further subdivided into those that target certain weeds, and these are termed selective. And then there are the others that are non-selective that will kill everything, and including your grass. And so this is definitely the choice of last resort. And a product like this would be with life. All this said, if there's one thing to keep in mind, killing the weeds is not enough. They will come back. And without a healthy turf, weeds are going to be opportunistic and continue to invade the lawn. So next slide, please. And Angelia, from the photos that you sent, we can see at least 3 distinct weeds. And I'm willing to bet that these aren't the only weeds that you have. But just to know, many of us have these 3, so don't feel alone. The 2 are very, very common. Crabgrass, as we've mentioned, that's definitely a sign of, that's a star appearance in so many lawns. And the other one is Lespedeza, that's a broadleaf. The first one is a grassy weed, the second one is a broadleaf weed. And these are summer annual weeds, and they'll probably be gone, as John said, in about 30 days or when we get the first frost. But they will leave behind seeds, as we pointed out. Most weeds do. And so they will germinate next year in March and April. And then they'll be around again for the following season. So you would probably want to consider using a preventative on them in March. So using the pre-emergent products. The pre-emergent products can come in a pelletized form in a bag, which you then apply with a spreader. And there are liquid products too that you can use with your garden hose. But even using a pre-emergent, that's not going to guarantee in all cases that you'll never have these weeds again and that they'll get rid of 100% of the targeted weeds. So when you do see them, keep an eye on them for the ones that the pre-emergent didn't address, and try to pull them when they're young and easy to pull when you first notice them. And of course, another measure, especially with the annual weeds, is to keep your lawn about a length of 3 to 4 inches. And this will shade out the sunlight so they can't thrive. If you go to the Fairfax County Master Gardener Association website, you will see fact sheets. And I think we'll point that out in a couple of slides following. But these are fact sheets written by all of our members that will address these weeds and many others. that I think you will find very, very useful. The third weed is a little different. This is called Kailinga. Kailinga looks like it, except for those little flowers, you know, it almost looks like regular grass, but this is a perennial sedge. It is just a form of weed that grows, you know, aggressively with rhizomes underneath. And so this one in particular is pretty hard to eradicate and is usually going to require a post-emergent treatment, or for that matter, even several treatments over the years. So, just to know that when you do apply it, or when you, I would say what you need to do is seek further advice on this one. Read that fact sheet that we have. But the active ingredient that you're probably going to look for in a product is halosulfuron, HALOSULFERON, and it's evident in a product called Sedge Hammer. But if you go to a full service center and ask a professional, they'll be happy to help you out. So next slide, please. So let's go back to what we said. Best weed preventive measure is a healthy, dense lawn. And in the little funny cartoon there on the left, you can see that a good dense lawn is not going to give those weeds much of a fighting chance. So look at it another way. Let's say you're walking through a dense forest with high trees and deep shade. Chances are we're not going to come across sun-loving plants, vegetables, or flowers thriving in that particular setting. So it is then with our grass. If we have our little dense forest of grass, those little weeds are going to have a harder time germinating than if they were to actually have availability of sunlight and oxygen and water. So again, we come back to healthy lawn practices that result in a good thick stand of grass are going to be one of your best ways of controlling the weeds. So, and to that end, fall being the time to replenish our lawns, it's a good idea to, if you haven't already considered it, overseed. If you can get somebody to do some aerating in conjunction with overseeding, that's even better. And of course, then you want to continue to mow high to shade out the seeds. And Angelia, we understand that you have a home turf team prepared to visit you very shortly. Is that right?
Yes,
So,
they
okay.
came today. They just left. So
Okay.
they pulled all the weeds and they're gonna send them in to tell me exactly which ones are there. So
well,
yeah,
I'm sure.
so I appreciate all. I guess my little Heine will be out there pulling some of these weeds.
It's all character building. That's what I say. You know? But they should have given you a booklet called Home Turf, a Healthy Lawns Program. If you have that, I would urge you to read it through and just follow the general advice. And then there are links at the end of each chapter for more detailed advice. And so with that, I think if you commit to follow, these general practices, you should be in good shape.
Thank you so much. It's frustrating, so I appreciate all the feedback.
Think of it as a game. Just
That's right. That's right. Well,
okay, so Kathy, back to you.
Thank you very much, Tony, for your excellent recommendations and knowledge that you brought to this lunch and lawn presentation.